folks, welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's One Last Thing with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ken. Just sitting here waiting for playoff football. We have to wait a little bit longer than everybody else does, but I guess that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very good problem to have, and having this discussion at this time of year is something I'd like to have with you again this time of year next year, because it means the Ravens are in the playoffs. Whether or not they're playing this weekend coming up in the wild card games, or whether they get the number one bye, it's always a good year when you at least start by having this conversation. So the Ravens have one scheduling issue that was a little nutty for this. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we got a list of reasons for playoff optimism and pessimism, but this not being one of them. The AFC games are all scheduled as the three earlier games, and I'm wondering if that may mean the Ravens get to play on Sunday rather than on Saturday next week rather than Sunday.
Yeah, it seems like it might. I mean, it would seem logical, so as not to allow the 49ers to have sort of a little bit of an unfair advantage of playing a team on only 6 days of rest. But we'll see. I mean, the NFL sometimes will make scheduling decisions out of nowhere, and I guess we're all at their beck and call.
Right. All right. Well, let's start with reasons for pessimism, and we'll read them down 3, 2, 1, and we'll just each have a chance to react to the others, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I termed it reasons for concern because I am quite optimistic.
Very good
overall, but So I would say one of the reasons for concern here might be, we're mostly going to be playing teams who have seen us in the season already. So most of the possible teams that we could play, we could be seeing for the second time this season, just it's hard to beat a team 2 times in a row. And a team that's had an opportunity to see how our defense operates, how our offense operates. You would think that they would have something to learn from their last experience having played us, and just having seen the manner in which Monken's offense operates.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a reasonable one, and it was probably even more so of that 2019 team. But I'm there's a couple of things about it. First of all, when people say it's difficult to beat a team 3 times in 1 year, difficult to beat a team 3 times in 1 year because they have to make the playoffs despite 2 losses to you, and then you have to beat them a third time. But it certainly happened to the Ravens versus the Steelers, and if the other team is just a little bit better, then that's the way it will often end up playing out. So. I think that's it's something that I wouldn't list as the reason for it. But that said, teams that have seen the Ravens before, the Browns and the Steelers did beat the Ravens the second time, once after a win, once after a loss. So maybe there's something to be said for that. We move on. I'll go to my number 3, which is weather. Walking up, I'm worried about a lot of things with regard to football. I worry about things not going exactly to plan when you have a clearly better team. And that's what the Ravens have going into this playoffs, is they have a clearly better team than any other in the National Football League, including the 49ers. But in the AFC, the margin is even wider. So then you start to worry about not necessarily play elements, which there are some of, but you start to also worry about other elements of conditions. And this Ravens team has not really been tested in conditions like high wind or extreme cold, which can happen in the playoffs. Walking up to that Tennessee game in 2019, really noticed the wind whipping. And, it was 15, 18 miles an hour. One of the first passes by Lamar sailed off Andrews' hands and to Byard, I believe, who was the guy who intercepted it, for one of the very big plays that changed the game significantly. And, any kind of wind takes away 2 of the Ravens' big advantage, or mitigates 2 of their big advantages, one being Tucker and the other being Lamar. And you don't want to have Lamar the passer impacted by environmental conditions.
I would say that's a very fair assessment, but I would say that Tucker is very familiar with how the wind can affect play in M&T Bank, and that's the only place he's going to be playing before if we get to the Super Bowl, and that'll be more
Allegiant.
Yeah. So, I'm not as concerned about Tucker in that scenario, I think it is more of a concern with Lamar in that respect in the passing game. Although, I guess we could say that we've had a mostly sort of temperate kind of weather for this time of year so far. So hopefully that's not going to be too much of an issue. Certainly going to be better than traveling to Buffalo or Kansas City, where it's projected to be -10 on this weekend.
-10 on game day or for a low at night or some such.
Well, I saw. You know what? I'll have to look, but I think they said game day -10. So I mean, we'll see. That would be truly brutal, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would be brutal, and I honestly do think it would take away a lot in terms of potential Ravens advantages. How about your number 2 item?
My number 2 item, could offensive inconsistency rear its ugly head? One of the key things I believe that a team needs for a successful postseason run is to sort of, have some struggles and then start to kind of hit its stride at the right time. I think that's incredibly important in any season. And that's why I kind of was a little nervous when, the 14-2 Ravens were, hosting their playoff game in 2019. But in this season, we definitely had our share of offensive inconsistency and struggles early on. It's just a question of whether we can kind of maintain the consistency that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 weeks. I think we will, but the question is, what happens when you have an untimely, Lamar fumble? People forget early on in the season, Lamar had a number of fumbles, and it wasn't just on Lamar. A number of them were sort of awkward kind of exchanges and things like that. If one of those things rears its ugly head, and then all of a sudden the offense is sort of scrambling to kind of, get back on it, how do they respond? I think the offense responded well a couple weeks ago when Gus Edwards fumbled in the game against. I think he fumbled in Miami, and they rebounded well. So I think hopefully it won't be an issue.
Yeah, he fumbled against Pittsburgh, and that was the end. I don't disagree with that. And obviously, the 2019 loss, highly turnover-based, but it was also a lot of high-leverage plays that they happened to lose in the game. And, they lost some high-leverage plays on turnovers. They also failed to make 4 fourth downs in that game. So, it's just there's a lot of things that didn't go right. Some of those decisions, none of them I don't think were – I would not say that any of those 4th down decisions were bad ones to go for it. They just did it, and they didn't work out, and that's the nature of having a lot of such things. Is you can't be sure. So I'm gonna take injuries at skill positions and in the defensive backfield as my second concern. I think that's probably the biggest single concern. You want reasons for offensive inconsistency. Injuries at tight end, running back, and wide receiver could be a good reason. Zay Flowers did not practice on Wednesday. We're recording this on Thursday. A week and a half before the game. The running back situation has already gone through the loss of Keaton Mitchell, and we just had a fumble from Josh Gordon in the finale that may lead to Dalvin Cook getting an opportunity. We don't know that. I suspect it may be the case. And then at tight end, of course, playing without Mark Andrews and not knowing if Mark Andrews will be back. It does not appear that he'll be back for this first week. At least that's what I would say, but don't know if he might be back after that or not. And then the defensive backfield is incredibly thin right now. The cornerback situation, Ronald Darby had an illness this last week. At least that's how it's being reported, and did not play, although he dressed, which was really weird to me. So we'll have to see how exactly that plays out. He practiced yesterday, so there's probably no reason to believe that he won't be on the field for the Ravens, but he's very important. He had just over 5 yards a target this year, and they need him. And, it's been injuries so far this year that have gotten the Ravens out of their best defensive alignments, which is with Hamilton at the line of scrimmage and it's strong safety on a great deal of plays. And they have been taken out of that by injuries on the back end at safety and also by choices at cornerback being made that way. So anyway, I'd really like to see them go in to this postseason with a healthy set of safeties. And I think since they play 3 safeties, including Hamilton, obviously, on any play, they really have to go in with 4 healthy safeties. And so the loss of Darryl Worley is probably more significant than people want to admit. And if it means Adams has to play in place of Stone, that may be a decision that the Ravens coaches just decide they don't want to go with. So they want to go with Hamilton on the back end instead. Anyway, those 2 position groups, the injuries there, as healthy as the team is in general, are a serious cause for concern.
I don't know what you're worried about, Ken. We can always activate Ben Mason. There
you go. Great choice.
Yeah. He can, put him right in at safety or corner. You'd be all right. I mean, of course, those things are a concern. The ones that concern me the most, I think, are Zay and Marlon, because those are soft tissue things. I mean, if you remember, both Mark Andrews and Ingram were dealing with soft tissue stuff going into the playoffs in 2019, and they kind of were nagging and not really going away in time. I mean, it's why it's such a tremendous benefit to have this bye week, and hopefully they'll have the opportunity to heal up. I mean, those guys, it's not that important that those guys are out there, practicing and getting reps. In particular, Marlon. I mean, that guy is, like he famously said on Twitter once, "What's coffee going to do for a guy like me?" He's ready to go at all times. It's just a matter of whether his body's going to cooperate. So, hopefully this extra time will be sufficient to give him rest, and we can field our full complement, because it would be pretty disappointing if we can't be out there full strength. And for my last area for concern is sort of in a similar vein to yours. It's health related, but it's health along the offensive and defensive lines. I'll sort of preface this by saying I'm not aware of any injuries along the defensive line. The defensive line, for me, it's what we've been talking about all season. It's a matter of the defensive line rotation. We have some players who are either on closer to the end of their careers than the beginning, or players like Owe who have had injury concerns in the past. And in fact, Owe did come off the field with some sort of, a shin or something that was bothering him. So there's that aspect to it. If God forbid one of those guys goes down, we just don't have a whole lot of depth. We have more depth on the outside than the interior for sure. But you really don't want to be looking for defensive linemen in the playoffs. So there's that aspect to it. And then, of course, the offensive line, we know that Ronnie and Morgan Moses have, been battling through things this year. And the Ravens, to their credit, I mean, it goes against, typical thinking on how to manage these things, but they seem to have gotten something right with this rotation. I mean, I think it's a testament to the fact that the Ravens have a depth along the offensive line that is probably among the best in the league, if not the best in the league. But they've really kind of keyed into something here. And actually, I'm curious, Ken, when you respond to this, do you think that this rotation will continue in any form during the playoffs?
Yeah, legitimate question. So let me address them in the order you did. I'm start with the defensive line. Same 5 guys have been healthy and taken every single snap all year. So the health doesn't really bother me too much. Have they got worn down a little bit from where they were at the early in the year? Maybe Pierce, was at his best a little bit earlier in the year in terms of generating a lot of pressure. But they've also used Travis Jones in more passing situations recently. and he's really stepped up in terms of a higher level of production. The one guy who's had kind of an off year is Washington, and we'll see. Hopefully, he comes back and is a better player, both in the postseason and in the future. But he's had one of the latest snap loads. And then Urban, of course, has been just fine. So I look across the line with Matt at BK and whatnot. I don't have a problem. And I don't include the outside linebackers in that. The outside linebackers, as far as I know, are going to be healthy going into this game. Obviously, Owe is the one that would be a big question. Harrison also has had a groin injury, if we're including that outside linebacker position. And you want a guy who's going to eat some snaps from the others. Harrison's your guy for that. So anyway, I'm really not concerned at all on the defensive side. On the offensive side, I'm very concerned about the ability of the offensive tackles to hold up to the murderer's row of pass rushers that I expect them to face. So we're getting into mine, which is a little different, which is just offensive tackles versus these outstanding pass rushers. It will show up each and every week. It will be a focus each and every week, and the Ravens offensively are going to have to figure out how to deal with it each week. I think there's some other players who've increased their importance to the team during this time, and one player really glares is Justice Hill. He's on the field on passing downs. He can really help them as a pass blocker, and he's become a much larger part of the offense in that regard. So sometimes it even helps you a little bit to work through some of these problems in season. And then get you to the last point. Ronnie Stanley's had a terrible year, just an awful year, and he's been outplayed by every other tackle on the Ravens. Sorry, he's been outplayed by McCary, and he's been outplayed by Moses significantly for the year. But he's had by far his worst year as a professional. If he would have this year under any other circumstances where he was not injured and just, I can't do the same as I think the question would be, is he ever going to be able to do the same things again? He seems to be fairly optimistic from recent interviews about still being able to recover to a higher level of play. Let's hope that starts in these playoffs. He's been spottily good these last few weeks, and the best he's been during this season has been during the last few weeks in aggregate. If you look at the other side in terms of the rotational players, Moses has been up and down all year, but he's never had a really bad game, never had an F the entire year. So he's had like 3 Ds and 3 Cs and 4 Bs and 4 As. It's approximately that combination, which overall is quite good. And when I score offensive line play, one of the things I just tell people to expect is, there is significant game-to-game variation in play. And that it should be expected the way you look at a box score every day to see what a baseball player's done for your fantasy team. He's going to go 3 for 4 with 2 homers one day, and he's going to go 0 for 5 the next day, occasionally. And so there is that kind of variation in offensive line play. So that doesn't particularly worry me in Moses' case. What worries me is what's the cause of that. And he might be a little bit hurt right now and still trying to get through that. To your comment about rotation, I think that's something the Ravens have helped Moses through in particular. And Faalele, these last four games, has played the best football of his entire career, short career, but 4 games at a C level, and all those games were right in the C range. Is such an amazing jump forward. His aggregate raw score prior to these 4 games was, I think, .46 in his career. He'd never had a game that was not an F in terms of 20-plus snaps. And these last 4 games, he's essentially played a game and a half over those 4 games with a score right in the mid-70s. So that's a fantastic step forward for him.
Yeah, and the way I kind of look at the rotation a little bit is you're gonna, the baseline of if you look at like every play that Ronnie or any other player makes as a dice roll, I just feel like it's going to be like a higher quality dice roll that you're getting out of Ronnie every single time throughout the game, and I think that if they view it that way, and just anecdotally, either listening to the way that you've graded it or just watching it on film, I think however many 20, 30 reps that Ronnie gives you that are of a higher quality, and then dealing with McCary, who is better than the bad Ronnie reps that you're going to get were Ronnie to play the entire game, as well as mitigating injury. I do think in aggregate that is going to be better. it's a little bit harder to tell on the right side just because it's not very clear. Like, I think we have a better beat on like where Ronnie is physically than where Moses is physically. So I guess we'll see. But I don't think the Ravens should shy away from something that's been working for them against some teams with some serious pass rush. I mean, they did this against the 49ers. They did this against the Steelers as well. And it's been holding up.
McCary has been another player who's been off and on, but now he's got 3 of the last 4 games as I've scored it at a D+ or lower, 1 D+ and 2 Fs. And the 2 Fs, one came against Cleveland. This is going to really worry you now. One came against Cleveland where he got a .39 raw score, so there's no amount of adjustment. Be up to .47 after adjustment. The other came against Pittsburgh where he got .31. Well, guess what? Both those teams are in the playoffs, and the Ravens might face him in the first game. And he's particularly unsuited to deal with either Highsmith or Garrett. Not that anybody is really extremely
find me the guy who's well suited to deal with those guys.
Yeah, it's just you can be particularly poorly suited, but nobody I don't think is well suited as you put. But anyway, biggest concern by far opposing pass rushes in the postseason
for sure. All right, well then I guess we're on to optimism, the fun part of the show. So one reason for optimism I have is that the defense in particular is converting in very high variance situations. Essentially meaning sacks and interceptions. They've definitely had some drives that they haven't gotten really off the field on third down, but they've been excellent in red zone situations as well. So playoff success, particularly on the defensive side, really thrives on sacks, interceptions, keeping the scoring down to 3 instead of 7, and the Ravens have done that consistently. I read some articles recently, suggesting that the correlation between your takeaways during the regular season and the postseason, might not be as strong as you might think that it would be, and maybe that's because players, teams are going to be playing with a little bit more. A little bit more sense of urgency, a little bit, being willing to, go for it, in situations where they might not otherwise have or try different things. I don't know, but what I can tell you is that the defense that Mike Macdonald's put together is extremely well schemed. Everybody understands their roles and responsibilities. And when you do that, you have great team success. And that's led to, a number of, Ravens players being, near 10 sacks or more. And Geno Smith being, I think now second in the league in interceptions, in the season. And you continue to do that in playoffs, you're going to have pretty good results.
Yeah. You definitely hit on something very important, is that teams that have a lot of variation of result defensively are ones that do extremely well. And the Ravens, they led the league in takeaways. They led the league in sacks. They by far led the league in sack yardage.
If you found a $100 bill on the ground, you wouldn't walk past it. So don't pass up a chance at easy cash with MyBookie. MyBookie has the biggest online selection of odds and contests to fill all your sports betting needs, anytime, anywhere. So you can turn that sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. Bet on the NFL, college bowl games, or play for your share of big cash prizes in the weekly blackjack tournaments. And if you've been waiting for the right time to get in on the action, that time is now. Make your winning move today. Sign up at MyBookie and use the promo code RAVENS to claim your deposit match, redeemable up to $1,000. Again, that's promo code RAVENS to claim your bonus. Experience the thrill of sports betting right from the comfort of your home. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.
And they're constructed to make. They did that despite, let me put this, being constructed to keep opposing offenses from throwing the ball downfield in a way that could create big plays. So and also turnovers. But they work out of pretty much a too high look with a fairly light box, daring the other team to run at them, and they have gotten away with that to the tune of 4.5 yards a carry. They've gained a lot more on the other side of the ball in terms of stopping the pass, both the combination of sacks, coming up on the ball and whatnot. But it's a very well constructed defense that limits the roles of its three cornerbacks in particular, and that's the reason why that has not shown up as a weakness this entire year, in my opinion. Stevens has played very well, so don't get me wrong on that. In terms of somebody like Darby, I have heard it said that Darby likes to really play off-ball coverage. If that's the case, Darby needs to reconsider his position at this age. He's a guy now who really can benefit from having safeties watching his back. He's a good downhill player. He plays well in a short amount of space. He's not the guy I want defending anybody long. He's not the guy I'd want trailing somebody up the season. Anyway, defense extremely well constructed to keep that from happening. And I'm in complete agreement with your point there. I didn't include it on my list, but I included something sort of similar that we'll get to, and I think it's later on my list. But the reason number one for optimism for me is the rest and the health. I think we've talked about that some before. I don't know that we go into it deeper, but I also think that the Ravens are in a better position with both coordinators to take advantage of that than they were in 2019. I think, we'll get to that in another condition, but I think they also know how to use that rest, and they have reason to need that rest. They did in 2019 too, with a couple injuries, but they've got a whole mash unit of minor injuries that would, maybe at other time early in the season might keep some players out of games. Won't now, but these players need to be as healthy as possible.
Yeah, I mean the balance of need to recover relative to any kind of feeling of rust weighs so heavily in favor of recovery. This is a more experienced and veteran team at really important positions like quarterback than it was in 2019. In 2019 might have been the rare situation where they might have benefited to just play the next week just because they were just rolling and just keep that momentum going. And that's sort of the nature of how that season was going, and a little bit of inexperience on the team's parts, but also again, there's just such an unfortunate confluence of events, and the Titans were prepared and well coached enough to take advantage of it. Something that I guess the Titans ownership forgot when they fired Mike Vrabel this year. Sort of interesting, but I think the rest was incredibly important.
Is pretty specific that both the 18 and 19 teams had a game plan that was very effective against Lamar Jackson in particular. The opponent in each game. The 18 Chargers put 7 defensive backs on the field for all but one play, if I recall correctly. They played a quarter defense, which is unheard of, and they won the game up front. Despite that, their four man front just destroyed the Ravens in that game, and they floated the ball very effectively because they had all defensive backs playing linebacker basically. In the Titans team in 2019, I looked at that as more of a being specifically prepared for Lamar to run the pistol plays that were him reading to the outside. They just were very prepared to shut that down. Now, that said, they allowed a bunch of yards to Lamar in that game. That game evolved into something else where Lamar had to pass and then was running from the pocket and got a lot of yards that way. They ran as many plays as they ever have. It's not a good thing in this particular case that they did so. But they really failed on some high leverage plays, and the Titans kind of handed them a little bit of a physical beating on the field too, in terms of what Derrick Henry did to them. So it was two teams that really I don't think there is the same ability to do that against the 23 team. I think Lamar Jackson hurts you in many more ways than he did before, and the offense is structured for that to happen.
I think you're absolutely right. And by the way, the Chargers in 2018, that's a really good example of what I was talking about a team meeting you for the second time. They saw, just how much Lamar was able to kill them with speed, and they're like, you know what, we're not going to let him beat us that way. He's gonna have to do something else. And rookie Lamar wasn't quite the passer that he was, in 2019. Certainly not the passer he is now. Wasn't able to deal with it, and they, kudos to them. They came up with a great plan. So that'll lead nicely into my next one, which is sort of the offensive ingenuity and evolution throughout this season. I mean, I think you can talk about both Todd Monken and Mike Macdonald, and we've done so, ad nauseum throughout the year, their ability to sort of adapt to different situations, which I think is a really welcome change from recent coordinators, at least in my opinion. But in particular, I'm focusing on the offense because what we've seen in recent weeks is sort of some tendency breakers, which is a really important thing to be able to kind of generate this late in the season, and one of them being the use of Justice Hill in the passing game. Huge tendency breaker. He really hadn't been used that much in the passing game, even though all of us kind of expected him throughout his career to be used more. Also, just having different players leak out a little bit more as sort of outlet options, which led to huge completion to Gus Edwards fairly recently. And, just adapting to different game time situations. And I think that really bodes well for the playoffs if that were to continue.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, by the way. And I have mine is so similar. I'm just going to jump right into mine because I think that both units are multiple, balanced, and adaptable. And I think that makes them harder to defend in game plan again. We went into this a little on the Lamar side already, is that Lamar can hurt you in a lot of different ways. He can hurt you from the pocket. He can still hurt you with his legs. And I had a pod recently with Mark Horton, by the way, great pod if you want to listen to somebody who really gets it in terms of various football things. He talked about is it more? Are we going to see more designed runs from Lamar Jackson in the playoffs? And there's lots of reasons to believe that might be the case. Certainly, if you're ever going to take the risk, now is the time. Your advantages in this game are where you get it. You want to go for it on fourth down with Lamar Jackson, and you want to try something funky. You go ahead because the future is now in terms of anything. And literally, looking ahead at 2024, very important to take this opportunity as far as it will go. I think I would agree, without bashing the past coordinators, that the two guys they have now are more adaptable, and the pieces they have made them more adaptable. But Macdonald in particular is remarkable at not tipping his hand defensively pre-snap in terms of what he's doing. And that's proved to be very different and very special in terms of what the pass rush has been able to accomplish. Whereas obviously, other coordinators in the past, and Wink in particular, had a bias towards pressure that manifested itself in numbers, additional safeties at the line of scrimmage and whatnot, that does tell the opposing offense what they need to do at the snap in some cases. Now, some can't do it anyway, and then you might rather have, the way Wink does it. But when the teams don't know, that's also a good chance to confuse the opponent and get them to do something that they, shouldn't have wanted to do. I think that the best play of the season I can think of in that regard is the Hamilton tip pick six to himself. It's just one of the great plays of the year. You probably heard me talk about it a couple times if you're a regular listener of this show, but for him to start off ball, get right into the throwing lane. I mean, they knew what was coming. The play was exactly schemed up for Hamilton to tip a ball to himself for a pick six, and it happened. So they baited in a lot of ways Watson to look left and go to Njoku, and it didn't work. So they're much better in a lot of ways, both offensively and defensively, but particularly defensively in understanding how to fool the opponent.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Macdonald is this rare combination of disciplined and willing to be deceptive. Deception from Mike Macdonald generally doesn't mean you're going to get more than 4 rushers, right? He's going to get there with 4, but you're not necessarily going to know which 4 are coming. And Mike Macdonald doesn't freak out. He doesn't say, okay, it didn't work on the first drive, so now we need to, adaptability doesn't mean that you need to run away from your game plan immediately. He makes slight adjustments as necessary. The big adjustment will come at halftime if necessary. But he knows that his general scheme is sound. Help out your corners. Don't leave them on an island. And get home with 4. And that leads to success. These I would say that this is the most adaptable combination of coordinators that we've ever had in Ravens history, and I don't think it's close. I think at the end of Mike Macdonald's tenure with the Ravens, whenever that will be, I think we will be talking about him as easily one of the top 3 defensive coordinators ever for the Ravens, if not, number 2 or number 1.
That's a very deep list. That's a very, very deep list. And younger fans, before you make the mistake of jumping in on that and saying, yes, he's definitely there, he's not definitely there yet. I can just tell you that. And the guy I would point to in the past who is adaptable and doesn't get a lot of credit for being the leader of a defense that was inherently so great, or that's the way it seemed, Marvin Lewis. I mean, just remarkable cat at using multiple defensive backs. And that 2000 team played 34.5% of dime with 6 or more. And 55 of those snaps plus another 7 in the Super Bowl were with 7 defensive backs. I mean, he would use all sorts of combinations to make use of the assets he had. Very, very adaptable coach. His very first year with the team, they had to move from a 4-3 to a 3-4 in season because of injuries on the defensive line, which is a terrible position to be in. And they were quite a bad defense in 1996. But Marvin Lewis held that together in a way and then built a great defense, in part by being adaptable. By the way, to your point, 20.5% of the time Mike Macdonald has rushed 5 or more this year, which is a very low number. There are teams that rush even less than that, but that's a very low number in Ravens history. That's exceedingly low. And in particular, he almost never rushes 6 or 7, which he's only done a total of 37 times a whole year. So less than 2.5 times per game, actually just over 2 times per game. So to me, a really, really remarkable year of basically playing conservatively and still being able to be confusing enough to the opponent to be very effective.
Yeah, and if you look at recent Super Bowl champions, getting home with 4 is exceedingly important. I mean, nobody thought that the Bucs were going to beat the Chiefs, and how did they do it? They got home with 4. I mean, they had Mahomes running for his life the entire game, and it's maybe it seems obvious. Great pass rush, is a good thing to have in a Super Bowl, but it's just the cascading effect of not needing to send extra players to rush the quarterback is just tremendous, and it'll be a big part of the reason why the Ravens advance if they advance. Yeah. So for my number 1, it's that this team is battle tested. I think it's incredibly important, as I mentioned before, for a team to have to overcome struggles throughout the course of the season and really understand where their deficiencies lie and learn. Just like I said, that it's an advantage for teams who've seen us in the past to have to play us again. Well, we have played against a great majority of the teams that are in the playoffs on both the AFC and the NFC side, which is an incredible gauntlet. The fact of the matter is we've beaten 10 teams that ended up having a winning record, beating the NFL all-time record in that respect by 2 games. And I think a point you made recently was that this has been happening a little bit more often now that it's a 17-game season, and the odd number, you have more teams with potentially with winning records, which is a good point. But those teams had to win more games, and we have beaten those teams that have won more games. We came out of an AFC North with for the first time in nearly 100 years that that entire division has had a winning record. It's been a long, brutal season, and aside from having to, the big things are like, okay, we've beaten a Rams team that threw everything they had at us, and we struggled and we came out on top in overtime, or we've demolished two really good teams in Miami and the 49ers who threw everything at us. All that's great, but there's also like little things throughout the season that if you learn them during the season, and they come out in the playoffs, it's just such valuable experience. Like, for instance, Marlon Humphrey, he is never going to try to blow up Deebo Samuel again. If he sees him in the Super Bowl, he is going to wrap up when he tackles. And these are little tiny things that you think might not be that big of a deal, but if they get to the Super Bowl and the 49ers get to the Super Bowl, Marlon Humphrey is going to pull up that film and he's going to say, look at how I gave Deebo Samuel the best hit that I got, and I bounced off of him and he made a play. We got to wrap up when we get this guy. And that's just such a valuable experience to have. And the Ravens have it. They've been through the gauntlet and they've come out on top.
Yeah, I think that's a good actionable point. I think the Ravens they have some team accountability that goes on field. You can see. I look for it in terms of the emotes after the play. Watch who's talking to who about what happened on the play. There's a lot of teaching moments out there, and you got some bodaciously good teachers. I think some of the things we've seen from Smith in particular are really remarkable, and they build a higher level of expectations in the other players. And specifically in his case, I'm talking about on-field awareness of game situation. I keep coming back to allowing the guy to stand and then tackling him to get the clock down to 2 minutes as one of the greatest football plays I've ever seen. In terms of just on-field awareness, there's nothing that matches it. In terms of just knowing, here's exactly where we are, here's the benefit we can get, being able to adjudicate it on the spot, nothing like it. And if you have a guy making that decision on field, the other guys around him have to start making decisions that are at a better level too, even though they may not reach that level or may not even have the opportunity to make such a play at that level. It just was so brilliant. Regarding your divisional comment, by the way, mine effectively is the same thing, that this team is extremely battle-tested. They have the ability to thrash good teams that has shown up throughout a very difficult schedule. A couple of ways I want to look at that I don't think are normally said. The AFC North didn't just have every team finish over 500. They finished with a 43-25 record as a group. 43-25. Now in football, that's extraordinarily good. But let's take out the 12-12 they were in the division, because that's what every division is 12-12 amongst themselves. They're 31-13 outside the division. That gives you an idea of just how great this freaking division was in terms of thrashing others. It is more likely you'll have a 10-7 and 3-9-8 team show up these days, in this era with the 17-game schedule. And I think that probably will happen again sometime in the next 20 or 25 years, maybe sooner. But anyway, it's more likely the NFC South is a little stronger than it is this year. All the teams get to be just a little bit over, and the division's not really that impressive, but everybody's over 500. This ain't one of those. The average team in this division was 4.5 games over 500, and then when you take out the games they played against themselves, it's 4.5 games over 500 still. Okay, so anyway. Very impressive, and one that I don't think is likely to be matched there. But the other component of that is not only have they played great teams this year, they have kicked their teeth out. They've beaten 10 of those, and that's incredible in terms of a number. It's so hard when you truncate down the possibilities. I mean, you can't win less than 10 games and have a chance to beat 10 teams with a winning record. Start with that. And then you play with some teams with a losing record and you lose to them, and then you beat the other 10. That's not likely. So you're really talking about 12 and 13 win teams. Very few teams ever have a chance to perform at the level that the Ravens have this year, and it's been remarkable. And the last point I want to make: the last 5 teams that they faced, who had a record at least 3 games over 500 when they faced them. So that's the Dolphins, the 49ers. Let's go back and see who else it was. It's the Seahawks, the Lions. There's one I'm missing. I knew this would happen. The Jaguars. The Jaguars. They played all those teams when they were at least 3 games over 500, and they beat them all by 2 touchdowns or more. No close wins.
Yeah.
They knocked the crap out of those teams. That's never happened also in a season in terms of having 5 wins against teams by 2 touchdowns or more that were 3 games over 500. That's a little bit more difficult one to research, but that is also the case. So it's just an incredible. There's no. Unless you talk about picking about specifics and injuries and whatnot, there's nothing about the Ravens season that wouldn't make you very optimistic. If results in particular wouldn't make you very optimistic about the playoffs.
It's one of the reasons why I kind of look at the Rams as one of the as really the team that I wouldn't want to be playing in the NFC playoffs. I think they're uniquely equipped and balanced. I think injuries to Stafford kind of derailed their season a little bit early on, and I think that they can really do some damage.
Are we going to agree that we'll be happy to face the Rams in the playoffs this year?
Oh yeah, I'll take any NFC team. Yeah, I'll be thrilled. There is some news here that'll give you some optimism for next year, Ken, and it's a little off topic, but I now that I would love the pleasure of being getting to see your face as I report this. The Ravens and OBJ have reworked his contract to remove void years from the deal, per Brian McFarland. The revision will allow them to use a post-June 1 release if an extension isn't reached by March 14th. This way, they can spread the dead money out over 24 and 25, as opposed to all of it hitting in 24. And he now has a minimum salary for 24 and a $50 million salary for 25 that becomes fully guaranteed. So he will not be retained because they can't have $50 million for 25 that becomes fully guaranteed on the first day of the league year or the 5th day of the league year kind of thing. Not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure there's more to uncover, but the headline is OBJ will not be nearly as impactful on the 24 cap as we originally thought.
That is nice.
Yeah.
A few extra dollars, and that sounds like a clever strategy, and one where hopefully that there's a realization between the two sides that this is either a parting of ways or just a very nice thing to do, and maybe in OBJ's case for what's going on. I'm sure he's being compensated for it. I'm sure he didn't do it out of the good of his hearts. All right, fantastic. Slava, always a pleasure doing this show with you. He's at Slava Cooperstein on Twitter. Slava, anything else?
That's it for me, Ken. Thanks for having me.
All right. And other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, you hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I want to hear from you, and this is a great week to do it. For Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye. We'll talk to you next week on One Last Thing.